Hello and welcome to a spooky special. As you can see, I'm dressed like a witch because we're here to talk about phobias. And it's Halloween, so what better time to talk about things that are really frightening? So I'd like to start by saying that phobias are different to fears. So we all have fears, absolutely everybody, we're all frightened of something. And a fear is when we have a very strong anxiety reaction to something. So for example, I have a fear of thunder, it doesn't really get in the way of my life. Whereas a phobia is an extreme reaction or almost an irrational sometimes reaction to something. So a phobia might be where it gets in the way of our lives. Maybe somebody can't go in a room because they once saw a spider in there, or they can't go out in the open and eat their lunch because they're so absolutely frightened of bees and wasps. I've asked on the group last week about what phobias you have, so I've got a great range here and I'll read through them all and we'll have a think about which ones we might use to talk in our video today. So our top one is spiders. It's a very common phobia, understandably, so we'll think a lot about spiders. And then wasps, snakes, heights, flying, the dark. 3 people are scared of the dark. We've got one here, fear of failure. That's actually not a phobia, that's a fear, that's a normal anxiety. Failure is something that's really frightening. Public speaking is something that's really frightening. And actually we'll do some work on anxiety later in the year, and anxiety work will be much more useful for that than phobia work. Although have a go with this phobia stuff and see if that's helpful too, never hurts to try. Illness, so again, a fear of illness is health anxiety, and that's a very specific thing to work on. If you go on this website called CCI, so the Centre for Clinical Interventions, there is actually a health anxiety CBT pack on there that you can work through. It's really good. Clowns, common one, and flappy things, birds, butterflies, moths is another common one. So we've already had moths, flappy things too. So thank you for that, that's really useful, and we'll think specifically about some of those. So our first question is, why do phobias develop? Well, there's a few schools of thought. So some people think that things like snakes and spiders and insects that could be dangerous are a natural thing, that it's almost genetic in us as human beings that we are scared of these things because it made evolutionary sense. If you were a caveman and you came across a big hairy spider and you poked it and you got bitten and you got really poorly, that's not a very good thing to have evolutionarily. Whereas if you were someone who was scared of spiders, you and your family were more likely to live. So that could be one school of thought. It's also very common that some people have phobias because they've seen their parents have those phobias. So I know quite a few people who've got a phobia of spiders, and so does mum, and so does grandma, and so it goes on in generations. So we learn these behaviours from our parents, they model it, and we'll then copy that behaviour. But whatever happens, they have developed. So we need to think about ways to manage them so we don't pass them on to future generations, so we don't let them get in the way of our lives. So it's important to think about that phobias are really serious. I know a lot of people who have a proper phobia and they get made fun of. Someone will throw a spider at them, someone will try and scare them deliberately. People who've got a phobia of holes, they might get sent photos of things with holes in. That's horrible. It's a really serious problem, and I think a lot of the time we kind of make light of it and we make jokes of it. So in the comments today, if we can all be really respectful and really know that a phobia is very serious and very difficult to live with, that'd be great, and then we can think about how to move on with them. So what's so horrible about a phobia? So what we know is that when we have a phobia, we have a very strong physiological response. And that's often the first symptom. So our heart rate goes up, we get all the fight or flight stuff, we get that panic in our body, our muscles get tense, we get really strong fear response. And that's why it's so intolerable. That fear response is awful, it feels really horrible. And that's why phobias are so nasty. So if we were doing some phobia work, the first thing we might think about is how to just bring down our body and calm down our body in a few ways. So we've talked before about breathing. If we can do some soothing breathing in for a count of 4 and out for a count of 6, or just nice slow breathing where the in-breath is shorter than the out-breath, then that helps to bring down our body. We can't fight that. We can't help but calm down when that happens. Another thing we can do is called progressive muscle relaxation. So that's where we start at our feet and we clench all the muscles in our feet. And then we really slowly let those go. And then we tense our lower legs and really really, really slowly let them go. And then our upper legs, stomach, chest, shoulders, arms, hands, kind of going through every section of the body. Face, screw up your face, and slowly let that go. And the more slowly we let that go, the more relaxing that feels. It just causes our muscles to get really tired and then rest and relax down. So soothing our body is a really useful first step. Now, when we think about therapy, we always start with Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, CBT. And in that, we think about the cognitions, the thoughts, and we think about how they cause horrible feelings, and we think about how what we do can be really unhelpful and can keep that cycle going. So like with our last video where we talked about formulation, you might want to do your own formulation about your phobias. We would think about challenging the thoughts, and we think about challenging what we do in response, our behaviours. So initially, therapy, you might have heard about something called flooding, and that's where you would expose somebody to their feared situation really, really intensely. So if somebody had a phobia of spiders, you would get a massive tarantula and put it on their face. You would do something really, really horrible and make them sit with that. And that would cause somebody to apparently eventually not become scared of that thing. Modern psychology says that this isn't that useful, often can be very traumatising, understandably, and really, really difficult. And so what we do is called a graded exposure approach. So we slowly grade up what somebody's doing. We'll talk about that in the behavioural section. But just to pre-warn you all that we won't be just chucking you in, flooding in the deep end. We'll do this really gently. Always treat yourself very gently with this work. So we start thinking about the anxiety. So often we have anxiety about the problem, we have anxiety about a spider or a wasp. And then we also become anxious about that thing. We become anxious about feeling anxious. So if you had an anxiety about, say, a spider, we'd wonder what was so anxiety provoking. What is it that makes you feel so frightened when you see a spider? Is it that you think that it's going to hurt you? Is it that you find it just disgusting and that disgust feels really unbearable? What is it that's so frightening about it? But also, with that anxiety, is that making you anxious? Are you frightened about being frightened of a spider? Are you frightened of walking into a room in case there's a spider there and you're being frightened that you might feel horrible? Because that anxiety is really unhelpful too. That anxiety is what prevents us from doing stuff. And we start to get into patterns of behaviour like avoidance. So we might avoid walking in certain rooms because we've seen a spider in there before. We might even avoid kind of going near the hoover because once we hoovered up something. We might avoid even sleeping in that house that night because we once saw a spider there a couple of hours ago and now we don't know where it is. So what is that fear? Have a think about that. And often we start to get into unhelpful thinking styles. So I'll share a link to the unhelpful thinking styles that we have. There are many, many of them, and we all do them at some point. So we've got things like all or nothing thinking. Oh my gosh, I cannot live with this spider phobia. I won't be able to sleep. I won't be able to this, I won't be able to that. And it becomes all or nothing. I cannot cope if there's a spider here. We can have things like where we start to predict the future. So I know that I'm going to feel really frightened tonight if I go in that room and I know I'm not going to sleep. And then if we make these predictions, sadly they become self-fulfilling prophecies quite usually. So once we've made that prediction, we then accidentally do things that make that come true. We might lie there and worry, we might look around the room, we might do all sorts of things that make that come true, and then we can't sleep. We might have filters that mean that we are looking for danger all the time. And that looking for danger can, again, make these things come true. Once we're looking for spiders in a room all the time, any tiny dark mark, we then suddenly start to go, and if we're always that vigilant, hyper-vigilant almost, then our body's going to be anxious and we're going to be more naturally feeling frightened. So if we ever do see even a tiny spider, the fear reaction is huge, that phobia reaction. So we need to think about challenging this. We need to think about the evidence for our thoughts. So what evidence have I got that I'm going to get hurt by this spider? Have I ever been hurt by a spider? Do I know people who've been hurt by spiders? Sometimes we might say no, there's no evidence for this, I don't know anybody's been hurt by that. But then we can have things that have got real evidence. So like bees and wasps. Sometimes we are frightened of bees and wasps because we have been hurt by them before. And so we have to think about challenging that. Was it as bad as I think it was? I didn't die. It really hurt. It was rubbish. But it went away. It passed. It hasn't stayed here forever. I know people who've never been stung in their lives and they've never avoided it. And we start to notice all these things that we do, all this avoidance usually, that we can use that helps to keep us feeling safe, but might actually not be doing anything at all. Things like with the fear of flying, we might look at the evidence for how dangerous is flying. And yes, there are plane crashes. Yes, things do go wrong sometimes. So then we compare that to, well, you get in the car every day. How dangerous is driving a car? And we can compare that evidence to see kind of how much have we, by accident, blown some of these phobias out of proportion. Flappy things in our face, really uncomfortable. Moths, they're horrible. I don't particularly like moths. But what's turned it into a phobia? What are we so scared of and how do we challenge that? Am I frightened that I might get hurt by a flappy thing? Am I frightened that it might get in my hair? So what? What's the worst case scenario? Kind of really arrowing that down to what is that phobia underneath and how do we try and challenge that thought? Now for some people that's really useful, for some people that's not so useful, and we move on to the behavioural stuff. Let me take a sip of my witch's brew. It's a cup of tea. So, behavioural side of it. As we've talked about before, it's about starting to gently increase our exposure to things. So our first thing is looking at avoidance. Have a think about what it is that you might be avoiding because of a phobia. Are you avoiding sitting outside to eat lunch? Are you avoiding rooms that are a bit dusty? Are you avoiding using the hoover because once you hoovered up a spider? Have a think about all the avoidance that you're doing, because often that's the bit that's getting in the way of life and making you feel really uncomfortable. And then start to think about how can we expose you very, very gently to the thing that you're scared of. So for example, if you have a phobia of spiders, what we find useful is to draw a ladder out, starting at the bottom, all the tiny little baby steps up that ladder that get you to the top. So the first step might be that you just draw a circle with 8 lines coming out of it and you make yourself look at that. And you have to wait 20 minutes because that's how long it takes for your fear to peak and then come down again. So 20 minutes at the absolute minimum. But if you can, 45 minutes is a really good time to be with this phobia and it feels like a really long time. Then after you've drawn that tiny spider, you might print out a cartoon of a spider. And again, look at that. Then you might print out a photograph of a spider, so getting a bit more real, and look at that for 20 minutes. Then you might ask somebody who's supporting you to find a dead spider, put it in a piece of Tupperware or in a jar, and you have to hold that and look at that. And then depending on your cycle, for some people they like to then move on to a live spider in a jar because they feel safe with that. Or they might want to move on to a dead spider that they hold in the palm of their hand because they feel more safe with that. And then you might have a live spider in a jar. And then you might have a tiny spider kind of maybe near you. You might have it on the windowsill and look at it quite closely, or you might even then move up to putting it in your hand. And you have to pick something that's more than you would do in real life. So I, in real life, wouldn't go and just pick up a spider in my hands. I'm not like that. I would probably get a glass and a piece of paper and take it outside to let it leave my house. But you need to go one thing a bit scarier than real life. So if you want to be the person who can just scoop up a spider and pop it out the back door, then what do you need to do to be quite scared? Do you need to pick up quite a big spider? Do you need to pick up a spider and kind of let it move around your arms a little bit? And the rationale for doing this is because all of us, when we do graded exposure, is when we get to the top, all of us slip back down again, all of us. Just what happens. So if you can go to something really scary, when you slip back down, you just slip back down into what would be useful for normal life. So try and have a think about what your ladder would be. For things like going out and there being bees about, maybe you could start by going out on a bit of the winter when there's not really any bees around, and big coat on, have a quick sandwich, and that's you sat outside for lunch. And then you might go out later on when there's starting to be a few more things flying around, maybe flies, hoverflies, and then going out when there are bees about and seeing if you can just stand there again for 20 minutes. Don't have to eat because you're not going to attract the bees then. And then you might move on to sitting outside and having a sandwich and really just exposing yourself, having that graded exposure go up and up and up. And again, it's hard to think sometimes of the thing that you might want to do that's more scary. So if what you want to be able to achieve is to sit outside and eat your lunch and not really be fussed when there are bees flying around, then maybe you need to go to a place where there are quite a few bees. Maybe, I don't know, if you can find someone who is a beekeeper and talk to them about going to see their bees and just standing there in something that is very, very scary. And actually that will help. So when you want to do something that's quite normal, you'll be able to face that. Fear of flying, for example. So you can do fear of flying courses sometimes at local airports where you go along and you learn about all the statistics and all the stuff that helps you to challenge your thoughts. And then you would go along and you might just sit in an airport. And then the next time you go in, you might sit on a plane, and then you can go, it wouldn't take off. And then you might go on a very short flight, and then you might go on a longer flight. So it's about exposing you, making that harder and harder and harder. Now, every step on the ladder is meant to be scary. And sometimes if we look to the top of the ladder, it can feel really, really overwhelming. And so that's why it's important that our ladders are tiny, tiny, tiny steps. Because if we think to the first step, it's only a little bit frightening, like I'm going to feel frightened, but it's not overwhelming. So then once we're at that stage, the next step feels the same. It's a bit scary, it's not overwhelming. And the next step, and the next step. Until we're near the top and we look back at our ladder and go, gosh, look at all the things that I've achieved. Almost a bit like with a real ladder. When you get to the top, you look down and go, oh my goodness, how far have I come? That's how we do it in those little steps. We don't flood you, we don't make it really, really anxiety provoking. We just do tiny steps, remembering the 20-minute minimum rule. So if we think about then resources, to do this piece of work can be a real challenge to do on our own, and we can do it. I used to have a phobia of dogs. I used to be really, really frightened of dogs because I was bitten by a dog once. So it was a phobia that was grounded in real life. And so for me, the way that I challenged that phobia was I started with dogs that I know are very, very, very calm. So I might meet a friend who has a very old dog who's very, very tired, maybe a big golden retriever, and I would just try really hard to give it a stroke when it was lying there, fast asleep, not moving. Because for me, the thing I was frightened of was dogs that are kind of jumping and moving really, really fast and feel quite unpredictable. And then I might see a friend and they would have a dog that was a little bit more active, a little bit younger, and again, give it a nice stroke. And then I'd take that dog for a walk. Walking a dog really helped with my anxiety. And then I tried to give a very gentle dog a treat to show that I wouldn't get bitten. And then I might start, so for me, my phobia was of smaller dogs. So then I might start to see people who've got Jack Russells and smaller dogs that just seem a lot faster, and start to just spend time with them to help me to calm down and know that actually I'm probably pretty safe when I'm with this dog. Until the point where I actually now own a dog, and he's a little dog and he's a jumpy dog. And it's just that exposure that helped me get there. And even now, I sometimes still get scared of my own dog. If my dog is really jumpy and really excited because you've said the walkies word, it can be a bit much for me. And so I just need to stand up and kind of be as far away from the dog as I can while I just clip on his harness, clip on his lead, get ready to go, and my anxiety comes down again. So even when we've challenged a phobia, we can still sometimes be frightened. And that's very, very normal. But remember, that's when it's a fear, not a phobia. My fear of dogs doesn't get in the way of my life anymore. I don't have to cross the street when I see a dog. I don't jump when a dog comes up towards the window of a house. If a dog barks, I don't feel really panicky and like I'm about to burst into tears. I can still sometimes get a shock. I can still sometimes feel a little bit frightened, but I can manage that. And that's how we live a normal life. We all have things that make us jump and make us frightened. To do this work, you might need some help. You might need a supporter. So if you can, try and find someone who will support you to do this work on your own. I really like resources like Mood Juice, and I will share a link to them. Their website's really, really good, and it's got a very good CBT program to work through to manage phobias. There's also a very good book called Overcoming Phobias by Patricia Furness Smith, And the Overcoming range of books I always recommend, they're very, very good. And again, it's just CBT, you do it yourself, chapter by chapter, and you might have a supporter to help you. That supporter might be the person who gathers the dead bugs that you don't want to look at, or helps you to think about things to put on your ladder, because it can be hard to think about when you're on your own. Again, if you want to get some support, see a GP and they might be able to refer you to, so if you're in Dorset, it's Steps to Wellbeing, and if you're in Hampshire, it's iTalk. Or you can self-refer to both of these services and they'll both help you out. And again, phobia work, working with somebody, it can be quite quick, it can be really, really useful, and it will help to change your life so that this phobia isn't getting in the way. So you can live a normal life and look after yourself and kind of get out and about and do those things that at the moment might be quite frightening. I guess the bottom line is that phobias work, it is scary, it's frightening, and understandably because a phobia is horrible. And it will be anxiety provoking when you're doing the work because it's meant to be. Like we always say with anxiety work, you have to feel frightened, you have to feel out of your comfort zone to be able to tackle anxiety. I'm afraid there's no way of doing it that's comfortable and lovely and sitting on a couch talking to a psychologist about childhood. You have to face anxiety, and that's the only way we overcome a phobia. But it's worth it. It's really, really worth it for that quality of life change that you can experience. And to have someone to support you who understands phobias, who is very kind about phobias and compassionate, doesn't make fun of you, doesn't flood you, can help you go at your own pace, is a really useful ally to have. So I wish you all the best of luck with your phobias work. If you've got any questions, just let me know and we can talk them through. If you wanted to think about your exposure ladder and you wanted to check it out with somebody, I'm happy to talk to you about it and we can think through that plan. So just leave a comment or send me a message, send me an email, and we can work through that together. But best of luck and have a happy Halloween. Take care. Bye bye.